and encourage you to submit them throughout the presentation at the bottom right-hand side of your screen in your GoToWebinar console. And we'll have a dedicated 15-minute Q&A session at the end of the webinar. So just so you know, we will be addressing those that you submit throughout the webinar at the end. And if you're on Twitter and would like to follow the conversation or submit any questions over Twitter, please use the hashtag DovetailHR, as we'll be using that throughout the presentation to discuss the webinar and address any questions. All right, so for those of you that haven't been on a webinar with us before and aren't familiar with Dovetail, I just want to provide you with a little introduction before we get started. We provide an HR case management and help desk solution that manages, documents, and reports on employee interactions with HR. It's designed to help your HR Shared Services Center serve more employees with fewer resources and provide faster, more consistent, and accurate information to your employees. And our ultimate goal is really just to support HR and Shared Services Center through technology and the education we provide. So hopefully today's program will help make your job easier and help you do it better. And just to tell you a little bit about KnowledgeSource, who has joined us today, KnowledgeSource is a global HRMS advisory firm providing consulting services to some of the best-known companies in all areas of HR implementation and transformation, including HCM solutions, shared services, and global HR and payroll support systems. Because they understand the need for speed, cost efficiency, and business responsiveness, KnowledgeSource designs business strategies that scale to global structures and provide effective service delivery models that optimize people, process, and technology. So that's just a little bit of background about your host, and let me just go ahead and introduce today's speakers, and then we'll let them take it away. So Dan Vander Hey is a principal consultant with KnowledgeSource, and his focus is on helping organizations assess their current environment and design strategies to help improve service delivery and overall business effectiveness. Dan specializes in managing large transformation initiatives and has led major HRO, global payroll, and global HRMS implementations. For the past 20 years, Dan has worked in a variety of settings and is focused on helping companies improve their bottom line and business performance. So welcome, Dan. Glad to have you on with us today.
Thank you, Emily, and glad to be here.
Great. Okay, we are also joined today by Kane Frisby, Chief Strategy Officer here at Dovetail Software. And Kane is responsible for developing Dovetail's product roadmap and also for building and managing Dovetail's strategic alliances to help better serve our customers. He has more than 15 years of experience in consulting, implementing, and managing employee and customer support systems, and has worked as an HR practitioner in companies all over the world, evaluating and implementing HR systems to support HR Shared Services Centers. So Kane, so glad to have you with us.
Thank you. Thank you, Emily. Really pleased to be here too. Thank you.
Great. Okay, Dan, I'll go ahead and pass the program over to you to get started.
Excellent, Emily. Thanks. And thank you, folks, for joining us in this webinar. I'm going to start by providing an outline of where we're going to head. Very basically, in this presentation, we're going to be talking about what, how, when, and where tied to shared services. And so, you know, at the highest level, those are the key things that we're going to cover. But within this session, we're going to talk about what your desired state may be for a shared service and how you can set realistic goals that will actually be accomplishable, and that you can start by setting service expectations around the capabilities and culture of your organization. The next thing that we're going to talk about is we're going to define the service offering. There's a lot of things that may be in shared services. We're going to try to establish some aspect of scope that's realistic for you and be very clear on what type of customer experience you want to enable for your organization. The third thing we're going to look at is some of the transition planning and the deployment steps necessary to not only to set this up to be successful, but how it can work on an ongoing basis and a complementary basis with your HR organization and operations within your company. As we look at transition and adoption, we're going to be talking about some of the key things that you can do to enhance your, I'll call it, chances and capabilities of success. And one of the things that I think both Kane and I are excited about are some of the technologies that are available today that not only make shared services user-friendly, but really extend the capability of your HR organization to provide access to people without the direct interaction. And so there's some exciting things that I think we're going to highlight realistically, so that as we wrap this up, we want to establish some tools and processes so that you can measure success and adoption of your shared services, not only to establish a baseline and expectation of what you have, but as you can make ongoing continuous improvement to what you have. So that's the overview. We're going to wrap up at least 15 minutes early so there's an opportunity to answer questions, and so we'll just jump in from here. Next slide. What are you seeking to achieve? Shared service is a model that really is designed to create efficiencies within organizations. There's not only building on common practices, but using key resources throughout the organization at the right time and place. And we're going to highlight some of the exciting things that are out there today in enabling technology that will make shared services really come alive. The things that we've highlighted here as key benefits are things that I think many of you have heard and maybe already realized within your own organization, whether it's reducing cost, improving productivity, enabling and improving decision-making within your organization, optimizing the skills of people within your organization to be able to not only address questions, but also address opportunities that may exist within the organization. The benefits that you're looking at within shared services are many, but one of the things that I think as I look at this particular thing, there's also a few examples around shared services that I see in this emerging category that I'd love to have Kane talk about some of these new emerging capabilities that I am excited about. I think Kane can help illustrate those things.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. So, typically from a technology standpoint, what we see companies adopting, the main focus around the HR core system of record. So typically a lot of those products are able to create a self-service environment, so employees and managers can use that technology to take away the calls from the service center, which ultimately drives down service delivery cost. And then some of the sort of technologies that you'd see in an actual service center, so what the agents are actually using, the good example there are things like the case management tool. Typically that's seen as a front office application for HR. And that is usually integrated to the HR system. So you have a sharing of data between the two products. So all the employee data is also accessible through the case management tool. But just harping back on to the, self-service is really the key here, because you're trying to have employees and managers self-serve themselves, so look after their own transactions, and find their own knowledge. There's sophisticated knowledge management systems out there that are coupled with case management tools that then help employees and managers answer their own questions in a timely manner. And of course, with self-service, that's 24/7. So, employees and managers can seek advice and guidance over the self-service portal anytime they choose to. And then there are other sort of higher tech technologies that some companies are implementing. So there's things such as the telephony integration, where a person calls up the shared service center and the HR agent can instantly see who's calling, and the case management tool is popped with, or screen pop happens with the individual's details. And then on even to things such as online chat. So employees can contact directly HR through a chat mechanism. And then even the sort of, which one that I see quite often now is the electronic employee data files. So capturing all your employee files that are in paper form and putting them into an electronic format makes it a lot easier for your HR agents to get to. So they're the sort of trends that we've been seeing over the few years.
Outstanding. Thanks, Kane. I think those are great illustration of a few things that I get excited about just as they have potential to extend and expand the role and impact that shared services and HR can have on as an organization. So when we transition to our next slide where we're looking at why implement a shared service center, I think our audience, as I looked at our audience, some of you already have shared services in place within your organization, and your question is, why did we do shared services? Others are probably at a point where you're looking at this as an opportunity and asking and have people within your organization ask you, why do we want to implement a shared service center? We're gonna speak to both those things in the context of what's the reason that you have to look at implementing shared services. There's two key drivers that we see time and time again. There are organizations who look to shared services because it's an imperative, it's a necessity. And those things are driven by mergers, organizational rationalization, the idea of, very intense pressure to reduce headcount, accelerate an ERP implementation, optimize the technology value that's there within the organization, and those tend to be what I'd call necessity drivers, where it's almost you have to do something because you've got cost constraints and people constraints, or the flip side of necessity is opportunity, and that's a great spot to be where there's significant growth. You may be going through a merger and acquisition. All of a sudden there's more people in more places than you've had to deal with before, and now you're trying to say is how do I keep, it's a little bit like herding cats. How do I address all the different needs within my organization without having, a business partner in place in all the different geographies to be able to address the needs and questions of the organization? So, what's the driver behind shared service for your organization? At this point, that's something that uniquely you folks who are participating can start to look and say, well, where do we fit within, this, I'll call it this 9-box quadrant. What's the driver for change? What are some of the things that are doing this? As I look at this, I think I start to see, some of the opportunities again of, where are there some opportunities here, how technology can be introduced to multiply the impact of process standardization and doing more with less. And so, in that area, Kane, I'm interested, what are some of the examples of where you feel technology gives you the opportunity to do more with less?
So thanks, Dan. Yeah, I mean, this 9-box is quite familiar to me. It's a good starter for people to look at and decide where they fit within this. And so just to touch briefly on the sort of top one there, the process standardization. So a good example I can give the audience here is, as a practitioner, I sort of implemented different HR systems in the many years, and one of the best ones that I came across was the Workday system in a previous role, where our challenge really was process standardization. That was our goal. So we had 22 countries globally, and we had a lot of different processes going on, and it was quite funny because when we did an initial process mapping exercises with the heads of HR, everybody didn't realize they were working differently until we got them in a room and asked the different countries to map out what they were doing in a standard things like onboarding or new starter, etc. And the good tool there for us really was a system such as Workday or an SAP or an Oracle typically has a process standardization mechanism in it. So you will find that most of your processes around the world are pretty similar. It's onboarding, it's new hire, it's leaver, it's joiner, whatever it might be. And the differences, the variances will be things that are local legislation only. There's certain differences in certain countries on how to hire someone, for example. But the good thing with technology is you can typically build those processes into the product, and the technology can enforce and support it. So typically the user doesn't have to know what happens next, because the system already does that. So that's one area that you can benefit. And then doing more with less, as you sort of started, a good example here. I follow a survey that's produced by Cedar Crestone on an annual basis, and I believe this year it's in its 15th year. It comes out in October, a very good report for anyone in HR and HR technology. And you typically see ratios of anywhere from sort of 250 up to 1,000 to 1 of HR people against employees and managers in a HR shared service center that's backed up with a case management tool. So where you have a decentralized or a traditional HR model, you're looking at maybe 30 to 100 ratio to 1. And with this less and more concept, implementing shared services, you can consolidate a lot of things, harmonize a lot of the processes, and streamline a lot of that stuff. And you're seeing exceptional ratios. As I said, sort of 250 up to 1,000 to 1. And those sort of statistics are kind of a global statistics from a report such as Cedar Crestone. So I think that's a really good example there.
Outstanding. I think the good part even about that Cedar Crestone survey that happens on an annual basis as well, Kane, is it helps get a sort of a running count on what's going on, globally, and helps, as I talk to folks, it helps them start to look at their own shared services ambition, what they want to try to achieve, and that's what we've got illustrated on the next page. We've all heard the concepts from Ulrich as an example that we all on the HR side appreciate the idea of HR being a strategic partner and being able to impact not only HR but the overall operational success of an organization, and being at the table as a significant player with the operations in driving the success of an organization. The way to get there, and I think most folks on this call probably have seen it in some permutation, the funnel that shows, how does all the different inquiry and contacts from employees fit into HR, and ideally, and that's what this graphic is intended to portray, is ideally 80% of all contacts should be the type of things that could be addressed through employee and manager self-service, whether that's through some sort of IVR technology or web technologies that enable people to get to the transactions, the information that they need to be able to address the questions that they have. And so this aspect of trying to increase HR's role on the strategic side by imperative demands that the transactional business, those things that take administrative focus, could happen through self-service technologies and or through tiered levels of support. And so the tier 0 it may or may not be a level that folks are familiar, but that's where you don't need people involved. Tier 1 would be those shared services, call center reps as an example, who provide employee support, process guidance, help people walk through transactions, handle FAQs that come up, have a knowledge base as well as some sort of a customer, a CRM capability to be able to understand who they are, when's the last time they called, what's the nature of the inquiries they've had traditionally, and there's some interesting, exciting things that are there. The broad questions that feed this, though, are driven by, and you can see some of the questions that I've posed over on the right-hand side here. A little bit this is driven by, where do you want to be as an organization and how fast do you want to make these things happen. Having the right tools, technologies, processes in place will help you push towards that strategic tier 3 type value for HR, but without those enabling technologies and capabilities in place, it's tough just to jump there. So, you know, there's a little bit of an ideal state when we talk about that 80% of contacts being in the Tier 0, Tier 1 type scenario, but we've worked with and seen many organizations who make that transition very quickly in pushing those numbers, and more as we see additional technologies and process optimization go in place, that organizations that are able to push that response percentage even further towards that Tier 0, Tier 1 area, thus increasing the Tier 3 strategic areas.
Dan, so, I just had a question actually. I was thinking, while looking at this, I was thinking, in your, you know, so far, how many companies out there have you come across that just still haven't implemented a Tier 0 or a self-service approach, or an employee manager self-service, etc.?
That's a great question, Kane. You know, I think the response rate in this area is still below 50%, and that's consistent with the data that we see in research. And so as intuitive as it is that organizations have these type of things, there still is a lot of manual process going on. And so the place that people initially branch to this is they make the step on the HCM or the HRMS side to put technologies in place that enable more self-service or manager self-service capabilities out there. Oftentimes it's easy for organization as well to build on telephony capabilities that they have and at least be able to route people to the right place to get information. But more and more as I talk to people, even in that particular area, IVR that points people to, I'll call it the supposed place where they're going to get the right point of information and access, is increasingly being seen as a frustrating thing for people who are used to working in outside of the, I'll call it outside of the boundaries of telephony. And so although the telephones aren't going to go away, increasingly we're dependent and expectant of things like chat and web self-service that enables us to get to a knowledge base and find information for ourselves. So that's a great question about, you know, the Tier 0 approach. The way that folks sort of start going there is traditionally through the ESS and MSS of an HR system, and then they grow from there. So some of the examples at each tier, and the next page provides just some further illustration of this, you know, what types of things happen in each of those different tiers. I think many of you are familiar with, you know, the whole idea of updating personal information, finding answers to questions at that Tier 0 level. But what I've tried to do here is illustrate what happens in those other tiers. What is the typical interaction and action that's involved at those particular levels? You can see that, you know, the time requirement goes up as we go from Tier 0 to Tier 3 typically. The idea is, particularly as we get into more complex interactions with employees, whether it's employee relation issues or onboarding facilitation or extensive communications, that ideally that Tier 3 local, I'll call it local property HR, you know, is where there's some specialists in those particular areas. You get some sense of the flow of information across the way. It's notable in this movement from, you know, all employee access to escalated issues, that there's been some enhancements in a couple very specific areas that Kane, I'd love for you to highlight a couple things in this area, how knowledge base has had a significant impact on employees and information, and how chat is sort of a new bridge between Tier 0 and Tier 1.
Thank you, Dan. Yeah. So one of the key things, as we mentioned earlier, is to really emphasize the nature of self-service. So having employees, managers look for advice and guidance themselves. And lots of companies obviously have portals and intranet sites already established. And employees and managers can use those sites to try and find information. One of the emerging sort of technologies that we see companies adopting is the almost like Google search capabilities within their own intranet. So an employee or manager is looking for help, or is looking on their pay slip, or is currently going through a particular process within the employee manager self-service and needs some context-based help. Maybe it's FAQs, maybe it's similar topics that they're looking at the moment. And that type of technology is typically a knowledge base or a content management system. Now, where does the employee go next when they've looked for help and they still couldn't find the help? The idea is that they could phone the service center, they could email the service center, they could use the self-service tool to create a case and inquire about something. Or this new notion of online chat. Now, everybody's familiar with chat. We all use it, Skype or Instant Messenger, whatever it might be. And the beauty here, again, is this doing more with less. So typically, a HR agent can handle between 2 and 4 concurrent chat sessions. So they're not handling a phone call one after the other. They're handling up to 4 different conversations simultaneously. And they're able to guide and and provide advice to the employee and the manager into what direction they want to go with the questions that they have. And there's some really good sophisticated chat modules out there that will even divert the employee or manager or the requester through to the relevant page they're looking for. So, for example, if I'm looking for advice and guidance on my payroll or when's the next pay group or my vacation entitlement, and I can't quite find the information that's on the knowledge base, then if I initiate a chat session, then the HR agent can actually divert me automatically to that page. And all those metrics that are happening in the background, all those clicks, all the actions can be recorded. So you start to build up a trend of what knowledge works well, what knowledge doesn't work well, and what are people contacting us about on chat. So what can we do to improve the service? Because ultimately, you don't want them to contact you. You want them to help themselves. So that's why those 2 technologies there are really key at the moment.
Excellent. Good examples as well. So defining your service offering is a challenge, just because as you look at all that might be in scope, there's process scope, there's technology scope, there's company scope, and the next slide that we're going to show you shows those key broad areas of consideration that you want to look at. Typically, it's an easy place for folks to get started in defining what's in play with HR service starts with the process and functional scope. Do we want to deal with HR data management? Do we want to include health and welfare inquiries, or is that something that we've outsourced to a third party? Increasingly, we see more organizations looking at leave administration just because of the significant dollars involved in folks on FMLA administration, PTO management, and even the litigious nature of people challenging how their time off is being accounted for and reconciled within systems. So having some interaction and capability of dealing with people in those areas tends to be a key area. The technology scope is interesting just because increasingly there's all different types of technology. And I thought, in this particular area, as you look at what's in that technology scope, initially as I talk to people about, HR technology, they talk about the HCM, HRMS solution that they've got in place, and they say, this is a technology that we've got. How can we enable and expand that? And I think one of the keys in that particular area is there's a difference between HR technology and HR shared service technology. So, Kane, help differentiate, what's the technologies that are HR focused versus shared service focused?
Yeah, so typically the HR technology is based around the system of record, details about the employee, details about the pay, the benefits. These could be multiple systems, or sometimes they're one system. But that's your sort of master data, so that's where the system of record per employee is stored. And then as we mentioned earlier, you've got these sort of technologies that deal with almost shared service technologies, so the telephony, the case management tool. I kind of put the electronic data management, the storing of electronic files into that as well. And then the two we mentioned just there, the knowledge management and the chat features. I think they're the sort of clear differences between the two there.
Yeah, and technologies that exist outside of I'll call the walls of a HCM or HRMS type solution. So those are great illustration of shared service technology specifically. The additional item on this list that tends to be very contentious as folks are looking at setting up shared service deals with this location and scope. Invariably, there's debates around, do we want to set up one physical location that supports the entire organization? Do we need, by nature of all the different locations and geographies are we in, is there a mandate to have around-the-clock coverage, and as a result, we need multiple regional centers? More often in this particular area, I think what the organization is, what the geographies that you have, where your people are, almost mandate how you answer these specific questions. If there's significant numbers of people in geographies across the globe, it almost requires that you have something that is regional. Many organizations still accomplish that, what I would call local-facing capabilities through one center, but there's challenges with that just basically because you end up having shift workers supporting that. But there's a variety of different approaches that are available in this particular area. Starts with figuring out what's the hours of operation that you want to have in place to support your organization. And as you look at that and the needs of your organization, generally the needs and where your people are will dictate the type of structure that's in place for your shared service. So that's one of the considerations, at least, that needs to be in place. The next slide helps some additional, I'll call it, areas of focus that need to be part of setting up a shared services organization. So, as much as I talked about location, most fundamental in terms of shared services, who's going to be doing this? Who are the people? What type of organization plan do we have in place? How are we going to staff it? What type of roles are going to be there? The people plan is an essential element of having a successful shared service. Without people, despite everything that we said about the technology, without some people to help make it go, it's lifeless, literally. So we spent some time talking about the technology structure that's out there and some of the key components of a technology strategy that needs to be put in place to set up a shared service for success. One of the other things that I see organizations who are most successful in their shared services implementation efforts are organizations who've taken on the whole aspect of harmonization or standardization before this. And so in that, they've looked at key HR processes around the organization and have made some efforts to not only standardize key processes, but make sure that there's some consistency across different regions. Part of the value in this particular one is just being able to keep up with the demands and the inquiries that happen. As there's different policies, different procedures, different standards across the organization, the complexity of responding to those type of requests and inquiries is much more complicated. So it's a key area of standardization and harmonization plays great benefits. And finally, and then this governance model side of it is just being able to start with the end in mind as you set up an organization here. And by that is have some sense of what is it, what type of service, how responsive do you want to be to the organization, how quickly do you want to be able to tell the organization that you can respond to requests. And so having some governance structure around how you're going to manage the ongoing delivery in this area is an essential element of making sure that you've got measures, metrics, and scorecards in place to be able to understand what type of service you're delivering to the organization. As a breadth there, strategy and approach. You know, there's a sequence, somewhat of a waterfall effect that's here that illustrates how we move from having a plan of what we want to do, discovering what's out there and what are the specific things that we want to set up, and that involves, you know, the people, the process, and the technology, actually putting a design in place and actually taking steps there to actually develop and then deploy this this shared service. The idea with this, I'll call it very simplistic staged plan, is the idea that there are a sequence that makes sense to help an organization set up a shared service organization successfully. And some of the things that work well around this is that there's a clear communication of what you're trying to do, and that people can see and understand where they fit within the plan. And so being able to have a plan, communicate that, and to be able to lay out the specific processes that are going to be part of the shared services are important in terms of communicating to the entire organization. One of the things that we see people get hung up on, and I've got two different slides that I want to look at here with you around structure, is how do we set up a shared service organization to be able to be successful? And there's some key components that we've illustrated on this slide that are part of a successful shared services organization. One is that there's some clear connection and line of sight to HR leadership and the whole organizational leadership. Whether your organization has this type of structure in place and or it's an opportunity for you to look at, having an advisory board that deals with things like service levels, process and strategy review, does some sort of what I would call oversight of how well the shared service organization is delivering, is a key element that I think is an additional that people sometimes miss. The steering committee that's within the shared service organization that deals with scope issues and expansion and funding is another key element of a shared service organization. And then even having some sort of user committee where you're getting input directly from employees is a key additional element that we highlight here, some governance structures that help shared services organization be successful. But as much as that illustration there is sort of a high level, people say, well, how do we set it up for what's actually in place in our shared service organization? And the next slide I'm going to show you is sort of the traditional shared services structure that we typically see. In this particular one, you know, it's the idea that there's some leadership and sponsor, there's a shared service director and a team that's made up of, you know, some functional experts who are potentially leading a team of people who are aligned to those functional areas. This has tended to be, I'll call it the traditional shared service organization that most folks get started with, where they group people, I'll call it almost in pods, around key functional deliverables, and therein have the capability and expertise of being able to address questions. But increasingly, we've seen that that's not where folks are comfortable today. And Kane, I think you've got some observations not only of where I'd say there's been some leadership on the EU side, but also some increased changes in what we see happening in the U.S.
Yeah, yes, correct, Dan. When I looked at this slide recently, but where I'm situated in the US, but I obviously come from over in the EU, from England, and working on shared service projects in Europe. Although they were globally focused, the headquarters were based outside of or inside Europe. We typically, and this is one of the differences I've seen between how we're doing it in the EU versus how it may be happening over in the US. We typically don't put the HR agents into functional roles. We have a tier one sort of first line approach where everybody who sits in that area answers any of the questions that come in. So whether it's benefits, payroll, whether it's vacation, absence, performance, grievance, disciplinary, it's always routed through to an initial team. And the benefit there is the career development. So typically, people coming into the business to work for HR, coming out of university, they need to learn how the business works, how HR works in that particular firm, and it's a good career development path from working in the service center, transitioning to either a center of expertise or a HR business partner, and perhaps up to the sort of HR director or CHRO. So that's one of the differences I've seen traveling between Europe and the US on how initially the shared service center is set up.
Yeah, excellent. I've got 3 slides that are basically illustrate some of the research that is out there that supports some key things about shared service. The first one isn't rocket science by any means. The whole idea about the importance of executive sponsorship and having people on board. What I'd highlight in this particular one is really the additional is just the importance of change management and communication. If people understand, what it's about, what it's going to do, and how it's going to impact them. And I think that it's important just to at least acknowledge that thing. The next research slide that we've got here that I wanted to highlight on the next page that basically deals with some of the best practices around shared services. I think the most significant aha for me here are those top 3. Just the importance of having SLAs, having key performance indicators, and even, as it talks about having case management. I think that, these are interesting observations around what are some of the best practices that need to be in place for a shared service organization. The next slide that deals with top optimization initiatives, significant here as I look at it is that, it's much just set up a shared service organization and you've got structures and people and processes in place that having tools that help increase the level of automation and even streamline the process are some great opportunities. And so, Kane, I know Dovetail is about enabling technology. What are some of the key on automation and streamlining that you see?
So a good example actually was one of the previous slides where you talked about the top initiative being SLAs and KPIs. Well, without a case management tool, that's going to be difficult to do. You're going to have to monitor things, you're going to have to track things, and you're going to have to report on things in more or less a manual process. So just bridging into that previous slide, it's very easy for a case management tool to track the interactions. I mean, that's the job of a case management tool. And with those interactions, you have events, so when the case was opened, when it was put on hold, when it was closed or reopened or whatever it might be. And so then you can start to really track the performance of your service center that's operating at that level. And you'll set particular SLAs and you'll have KPIs wrapped around that. And that will help you do that. Other examples could be onboarding, for example. As an employee is onboarded into the HR system, there's going to be lots of tasks that need to be done. And a typical HR case management tool with a sophisticated rules engine, will be able to automate a lot of those tasks that go on in the background. Typically, they're bits of paper or emails that are being generated around, and that can be brought into the case management tool and automated to do that job.
Excellent. So there's some key things I want to highlight around the foundation of shared service. We talked about people, process, and technology, and those things are extremely important, but even at that people level, there's some additional differentiation that I want to make sure I call out, because, the foundation of HR shared services is obviously to shift some of this administrative and transactional work to shared services. But there's a key role for HR that impacts the way that HR has done work in the past and how they're going to do it in the future. And the next 3 slides help illustrate that. The first is the role of HR business partners. Traditionally, the HR business partner has been the one who's always been there to provide information, access, transactional support for people within the organization. And the reality is the cost of having, as an example, one HR partner for every 20 employees, those days are long gone. And so increasingly the HR business partner has to play the strategic role and understand where shared services fits in and actually provides access and capabilities. And so shared service has an impact in changing the role of business partners, and it's important that we at least talk and acknowledge that. The next page talks about specialists. In this area, specialists play a key role in shared services and the tiered approach, because not only are they that point of escalation that people go to, sort of that tier 2/tier 3 type capability, but that's where people who are pursuing, I'll call it functional growth, there's a career path for people within a shared service organization to go from being a CSR to developing some core capabilities, and I'll use that as an example around leave management or compensation administration, and to even further develop that interest and expertise to a point that they could, I'll call it, transition to a specialist, maybe initially within a shared service organization, and then even as a functional leader within an organization. So having a career path for people in shared services is a key element of establishing an organization that's going to continue to thrive and grow. And then finally, the success of shared service is really going to be built on leadership. And, once again, the previous metrics that we showed tied to the survey isn't any rocket science to anybody here, but the fact that leadership reinforces involvement, use, and optimization of shared service is a key element of making this work with your organization. So, at the risk of trying to make sure we do have some time for questions here, I want to try to summarize with some of the key shared service values that we want to try to highlight within setting up a shared service organization for success. First, there's opportunities to reduce cost, whether that's having a fewer number of resources actually supporting transactional support, actually increasing the efficiency of responsiveness and the accuracy of information that's provided to people. The whole impact of improved management/decision support is the value of putting the right information in the hands of the right people at the right time, and being able to optimize that has great value that often goes above and beyond any of the cost savings that traditionally shared service can identify. And so increasing that productivity and efficiency not only comes from an HR perspective, but it also involves how you impact the productivity and efficiency of the organization as a whole. It helps people get to the right information at the right time and enables them to get back to their real work. And so providing a flexibility of a response for people that extends beyond traditional business hours enables people to get their business taken care of when it fits for them, and then get back to the business and making money. And so increasingly that's the big value that we see that organizations are jumping around in this area, is that it improves customer service, it helps people getting timely and consistent information, but the real value is that it helps people within the organization focus on their work and not the, I would call it, the administration of things that tend to take time and effort and focus away from the work. And so as we look at it, you know, our question to folks here on participating in this session is highlighted in this next slide. You know, why not start today? How are you going to take action? I think, you know, what we believe is the place to get started is develop some sort of roadmap. Confirm where you want to go and how you're going to get there. There's key work streams that it's important to initiate that are part of setting up and organizing for success in a shared services implementation, whether that's doing the process standardization that we talked about, identifying what your facilities you may need, looking at the staffing needs that you have within the organization, of bringing on the right people as well as training them, but also putting in place the right type of systems and support to be able to make this. So, you know, managing those things into an implementation and getting a shared service in place on time and on budget is sort of the key of putting in place a shared service organization that not only optimizes HR's impact, but actually improves the level of interaction between HR and the organization as a whole. So at this point, and I'm looking at the time as well, want to provide that we at least had some opportunities for broader questions.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Dan. Appreciate that. And we are kind of bumping up against the time. We do have a couple questions that have come in, and if you have other questions, go ahead and submit them. We'll try and get to as many as we can, and if we do not, then we'd be happy to email you. So one of the ones that came in is about HR leader buy-in, and I believe they're talking about technology in this particular question. And they're saying, when you're implementing an HR shared service center, what are some of the things that you can do in order to gain HR buy-in and executive buy-in on the front end for the technology that you need to support it?
So I'll take that one. So that was mainly my role previous to joining Dovetail, trying to get buy-in for technology investments for HR. So what I would tend to do is a lot of the time it's around mapping out the stakeholders, you know, identifying the people in the organization that are going to help you with the investment, because you can't do it alone. So typically you would do some sort of stakeholder mapping, identify the champions, the supporters, and those people that would actually challenge what you're trying to do. And really the key thing you're trying to answer for all of those stakeholders is the term, what's in it for me? So if you can come up with the answers for that, for the individuals that you're trying to gain support from, and then typically when you go to an investment committee in a company, there's there's usually different stages you go through. You need to make sure you have support within that room, and that there's no surprises. So make sure everybody knows about what you're doing before you get there, and it's almost a run-of-the-mill action that you're going there with some technology investment. A solid business case is obviously a key one. And proving that there's some payback. There's a payback period of maybe under 2 years, etc., or under 3 years. So I would typically follow those examples.
Great. Okay, Dan, you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that's a great overview. Thanks, Kate.
Perfect. Okay, we've got a couple more here. So what are some things that HR leaders can do to establish their baselines for measuring success and progress for their HR shared service center?
Emily, one of the key areas that we see in that particular is one, just identifying the the time and cost that goes into supporting people's questions, inquiries, and key transactions. Being able to measure, as an example, how long it takes to onboard people, how long it takes for people to get answers to key benefit questions, how long it takes for people to get accurate information around pay and time off. Those tend to be some of the things, those metrics tend to be some of the areas that I see organizations drive change. They use those metrics as a means to say this is why there's an issue or an opportunity, and as we move forward, we can look to these as dramatic and measurable measures of how we're being able to impact things being better and faster and more efficient.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, we are bumping up on the end of the webinar, so for the rest of the questions, if we did not get to yours, I'd be happy to have one of the speakers or both of them email you with the answers here. And just wanted to thank everyone for participating in the webinar and let you know about some upcoming events that we have. We are going to be attending the HR Technology Conference and Exposition October 7th through the 9th, which is in Las Vegas. So if you're going to be there, I'd love for you to stop by our booth. We'll be at booth 437, and we'd be happy to talk to you about HR case management, shared services, you know, anything that you want to discuss there about the technology in there. We will also be at the HR Shared Services and Outsourcing Summit, which is going on in Orlando, Florida, October 16th to the 18th. So if you're planning on attending that, we would love to see you there as well. So thanks, everyone. I just have written down our contact information, and like I said, if you've made it to the hour, then you have received your 1 hour of recertification credit, and I will be emailing you that program ID as well as the link to the slides and the recorded presentation. Appreciate you guys being here. I hope you found it valuable, and we will talk to you soon. Thanks.
Thanks again.
Thank you.